I just have a few short slides to share today that looks at a few things, right? A little bit about Uber's history since we started a short 5 years ago, our progress specifically in Europe, some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that we faced in this region, and then a little bit about what we think 2016 is going to look like for both for this region point of view, and then also some super interesting products that we want to launch, at least in this region, in the year that we think is going to have a fundamental impact on our customers in the area. It's fairly hard to imagine that, not many years ago, you were really just using your cell phone to call people. The multitude of ways in which we are using it now could hardly have been envisaged at the time. From, listening to music on it, using it to track your exercise, or in the case of Uber, getting to from point A to point B in your city. The idea behind Uber was really very simple. It's about, could I take my smartphone out of my pocket, request a ride, and magically in 5 minutes a car would arrive. Rather than have to drive and stress from point A to B, I'd get in the back of the car, I'd be able to phone friends, talk to loved ones, do some work, or simply relax and enjoy the scenery. And it went from this very, very simple idea to a phenomenally successful company, at least so far, in a short period of 5 years. So we launched to start in San Francisco in 2010, and it was really just a closed-loop system at that point in time. A few cars on the system, available for friends and family. And suddenly more and more people wanted to use it. More and more drivers wanted to drive on the system because they thought, well, this is actually something new, something interesting, maybe a better opportunity, maybe worse, let's try it out. And very, very quickly it grew from there to 2011. We realized that this was a real thing, right? So we launched in more US cities. We opened up the platform to the wider market. We also launched our first city, in Europe, which is Paris. 2012 saw us expand a little bit more across the US, expand a little bit more in Europe. 2013 saw us, move into South America, into Africa, into India, and other parts of Asia. In 2014 and 2015 saw massive, massive expansion in the continents where we are already operating. And very quickly our CEO, Travis Kalanick, began to realize that people wanted to use the system. Right? And the more drivers we kept on adding to the system, the more riders, the better the availability became on the system, the more riders got to use it. And if you take this sort of small scale, it's okay, but when you really, really increase the scale to 10,000, thousands of riders and thousands of drivers on the system, the level of efficiency that you get is really phenomenal. Because basically what happens is that the open distance or time from a driver to a rider gets ever smaller, which means that the system gets more efficient. And then you have this really interesting thing that happens, right? Because drivers can make more money for the same amount of time, same amount of energy, same amount of cost that they're driving at. Therefore, they can charge less. So customers are getting, a cheaper ride, better quality, and drivers are making more and more money. And as the system grows, as the system scales, that becomes even more, more prevalent. And it's really that sits behind the fundamental disruptive nature of this technology, why it works so much better than anything else out there. Talking a little bit about our vision for Europe. So globally, we're in 361 countries. I have to look back because we launch cities. We launch a new city every other week. And 67 countries. And of those 67 countries, 24 of them are in Europe, right? So that shows the tremendous dedication that our business has had to this continent specifically. Now, when we launched originally in Paris, we saw the demand far outstrip, that of which you've seen in the US, right? So it's just growing really, really quickly. But sort of shortly after that, a number of regulatory obstacles began to appear, sort of significantly slowing our growth in the region. So much so that whilst we launched Asia, quite a long time after we launched our European business, it has far outstripped our European business in both growth as well as total size. That said, this is a really interesting graphic that we like to show, which is that every blue dot that you can see on this map is essentially somebody opening the Uber application looking for a ride. And what it's clear is, despite the slower growth, despite the challenges, people around Europe want to use Uber. The interesting thing here is that many of those instances where people have opened the application looking for a ride, we're not even operating in those markets yet. So despite there being a number of big challenges sort of in the region, that we need to work out, there have been a number of very, very interesting bright spots, right? Our business in the UK being one in particular. So in the beginning of 2014, right, our UK business was way, way smaller than our business in San Francisco, right? 300% smaller in terms of trip volume on a weekly basis. But in that year, over the last year, our business in San Francisco has doubled, which is fairly sizable growth for what has already been a fairly mature market in Uber standards. But our business in the UK had increased sevenfold, and now it's only 20% smaller than our business in San Francisco. And really, what it is about this, it's where there's a will and a way, and where there's a sort of forward-thinking regulatory framework which we can work together with and build and operate in that environment, right? So what that means is that we now have more than 18,000 active drivers on our system in London. 14,000 of those active drivers are super active, right? They drive more than 100. They drove more than 100 trips, each one of those drivers, over the past month. And of those 18,000 drivers that we've added to the system, 12,000 of them are drivers that we've added really only in the last year. And it's this tremendous driver growth that has provided availability, reliability on the system in London, and has fueled the tremendous growth in riders and the tremendous growth in demand in that market. But it's not really just about offering safe, reliable rides to customers, right? It's about creating economic opportunity. And the interesting thing here is that over the past 6 months, working within this regulatory framework within the UK, we've been able to generate over 100,000 million euros in payments to our partner drivers on the system in that market, right? So that's a phenomenal economic impact in that market. We thought, well, what if we figure out the rest of the Europe piece a little bit better than we've done before? Obviously, we've made some mistakes along the way, and we continue to learn. And the reason that we continue to make ourselves learn and invest in these markets is that the opportunity here we see for both ourselves, for our driver partners in the system, and for riders is tremendous, right? If we were to figure out sort of, a sustainable regulatory environment where we could operate our business in this region, we'd be able to generate 250,000 driver partners over the next 3 years. That's a tremendous sort of amount of employment in many markets where sort of unemployment is an issue. We'd be able to generate more than 4 billion euros worth of payments, cashless, electronic payments to our partner drivers on that system, pushing that money into the economies. And of these two sort of, of these driver partners in this payment, the first year we feel we'd be able to do 50,000 of those 250,000 drivers and €500 million in payments. We think that's a real impact both from our business point of view, but also on the drivers and the rider side, and that's why we continue to be very, very excited and continue to work towards a better solution to our business in and around the area. And once we figure it out, right, it's interesting obviously to look at the numbers, but what's important is to understand exactly why drivers and riders use the system. And once we figure it out, sort of what are the opportunities that we're providing for them in this region. And firstly, right, we ran a study across our US driver base to understand exactly why they're using Uber, right, as opposed to any other alternative that's available to them. Well, 91% of them said, well, it's because it's simply more economically viable, right? They're making more money than they did before. 85% of them said, well, it's about flexibility, right? They can choose their own schedule. They can work on whatever days they want to work. They're not our employees. They're our partners. They're their own business owners. And that sort of leads to the last point, right? It's the ability to be your own boss, to grow your own business. In addition to that, it would provide a tremendous amount of safety to the system, right? getting in an Uber is probably one of the safest ways to move around. And that's due to a number of factors, right? Before any driver gets in our system, there's a number of checks, sort of, traditional operational checks that we put in place to make sure that only the right kind of drivers get on the system. But then in addition to that, the technology takes over, right? It helps you track, a loved one through Share ETA, which is one of our great features, as they move on and around the Uber system. There's no cache, right, which makes the system safer for everybody. And after your trip, you rate your driver rates you, and that retains the quality in the system, right? So what it's done is it's taken technology and replaced traditional sort of safety measures and made the whole system far safer than it has been before. It also adds a tremendous amount of reliability, right? So this chart is average waiting time for an Uber in some of the cities around the world in which we operate. 2.4 minutes in Chicago. That's pretty crazy, right? So from the time that you open your Uber application, you request a ride, in 2.5 minutes, just under 2.5 minutes, a driver's outside your door waiting to take you to wherever you want to be. That's faster than pulling out of your garage. It's barely enough time to grab your jacket, your wallet, your phone, and get out of the door. And it's when you provide that kind of reliability, that kind of efficiency, that you actually create, the opportunity for people to get rid of their cars entirely. And that's where the real opportunity lies, right? That's where it's sort of the long game, at least from a transportation point of view. It also provides, unprecedented amount of accessibility. This chart shows Uber trips that have started and ended in sort of sensitive urban zones in and around Paris. Areas that were typically very difficult to get to with existing public transportation infrastructure. So this means either you need to work in those areas where economic opportunity may be limited, or you need to own a car to get in and out of them, which in itself sort of represents its own challenges. But with Uber, essentially we've complemented the existing transportation infrastructure there and really connected people in ways that they've never been connected before to these areas of the city. A little bit more about connectivity. Right? So this is a chart that shows Uber trips that have started or ended at London Heathrow Airport, over a specific period. And what it basically shows is that, people are using Uber as a more convenient way than ever before to get to and from the airport, and basically linking airports in both London and in many other cities around the world, essentially to the rest of the city. The travel piece goes one step further, right? Because whether I use the application in London, in Zagreb, whether I use it in Warsaw or San Francisco, it's the same application. I only enter my details the first time, my card details the first time that I use it. So whenever I get to a new location, I open my Uber application, see if Uber's there, and then I know that I've got a safe, reliable, cost-efficient way of getting from point A to point B. And this is an interesting chart too that shows essentially people that have used Uber in other countries around the world and then have gone to Paris and then used Uber again there. Basically, essentially connecting them from their cities across the world. So if we put this all together, right, we think the opportunity is massive, specifically for the region, right? But the way that we do this is through partnership, and I think this is as we grow, as we learn as a company, this is really the only way that we'll be effective in growing in these markets, especially in Europe. But if we can do that, the opportunity is big, right? Job creation, we've talked about 250,000 driver partners. The economic opportunity is big. We talked about more than 4 billion euros worth of driver payments. But then it's also innovation. It's also helping people get around their cities in faster and easier ways than they've ever done before. The next couple of slides look at some sort of interesting takeaways, specifically to the region where I operate in, which is Eastern Europe. Now, I'm comparing it to some of our other European areas. So this is an interesting graph. It looks at our first 12 months of operation in a number of the cities in and around this region. And basically, what you can see here is that some of the biggest cities, Paris and London, although they've grown quite quickly, some of the newer areas, newer cities that we've launched, not only do we know how to do this thing better than when we launched in London and Paris many years ago, people also know about the service and they're waiting for it and they're excited about it. So that means we grow far, far quicker in markets where we launch in this way than before. A great example here is Warsaw. Phenomenal growth that we've seen in Warsaw so far. We launched very recently in Bratislava, not the biggest city in the world, but our growth there has been tremendous and has astounded us. I talked a little bit about partnerships, and this becomes increasingly more important, as I said, right, as we want to be successful in this area. So one of our partnerships that we're working on that we're most proud of is that, well, despite Uber being cashless, more transparent than this industry has ever seen before, we need to go sometimes one step further, and this is what our partnership with the Estonian government is from a tax point of view. So basically what we're working on there is that drivers not only will use their driver application to drive around, to move people around the city, but they'll also be able to take all the income, or at least report all the income that they generate on the system directly to the authorities, to the tax authorities, through the Uber application at the tap of a button. That's kind of integration, that kind of transparency that we're very proud of and looking to work towards there, and hopefully roll out in other areas. This is a little bit closer to home here, and really interesting. We launched in Zagreb just over a month ago, and the reception there has really been phenomenal. On the bottom left, you see a chart that looks at, once again, instances of people opening the application. This looks at the instances of people opening the application in the first 2 weeks that we've launched. And you obviously the number's not there, but it's 50,000 instances, right? In only 2 weeks, since we've launched there, people opened up the Uber application looking for a ride. This is some of the fastest growth that we've seen in any of the cities in the region. And that's translated, sort of more specifically into more than 8,000 users that signed up to use our system over that period of time. Also great. I think one of the things that we've done, well, at least hopefully, it's still very early days, but we've worked really hard to work together with existing transportation infrastructure. So the vast majority of our drivers in the system, are either taxi operators or other sort of transportation operators. And the idea here is to, rather than come into a market and have people afraid of the impact that the technology is going to have on their livelihood, actually work with them, work together with them and say, listen, you can still drive as a taxi or whatever you were doing before, but drive on Uber at the same time, let it supplement your income and let it work together, just providing more economic opportunity to you as a driver. And the interesting, we've got some quotes on the right-hand side here. The interesting, my favorite one here is where the driver talks about, well, when he used to be a taxi driver, he would have around 1 trip per hour. Now he's doing 6 trips per hour on Uber. Right? That level of efficiency is tremendous. And even though our pricing there is much cheaper than the taxi operators, it still means that drivers are making far more money. This is my favorite slide of the presentation. So basically, we pulled some data of people in Belgrade actually opening the Uber application, looking for a ride over the past few months. And the number astounded us, right? There's 15,000 instances of people opening the application here, looking for a ride, even though we don't really operate, well, don't operate at all in this market yet. I was trying to figure out to myself, what is the square dot on the left-hand side, when I actually had a look at the map and realized that that's the airport. And it's people getting to the airport, opening the application, thinking, well, shucks, wouldn't it be great if I could just sort of get my Uber, call my Uber, rather than charge me 5,000 dinar to the hotel. Right. I mean, that's it for the region. I think the next bit looks a little bit at some of the products that we're very excited about for 2016 to launch the market. The first one is Uber Pool. Uber Pool is a product we started testing in the beginning of this year in San Francisco. We've rolled that test out to New York, to LA, to Paris, and then a week and a half ago to London. And the concept is sort of next level Uber, right? So whereas an Uber would pick you up, take you from point A to point B, then take the next customer from sort of around about point B to point C. The idea is, well, once we've got enough riders and drivers on our system, we can actually use our data to much more accurately predict how people are moving around the city. And let's combine people into one car rather than just move one person a car at any one point in time. So the idea here is to pick up a passenger on the way to the first passenger's destination, you pick up the second passenger, on the way to the second passenger's destination, you do pick up the third passenger, etc. This has phenomenal implications for efficiency, for the level of, the amount of traffic that you have on the roads, and just sort of, the economic impact that driving around your city has on your market, right? So on average around the world, the personal car carries 1.6 passengers, does 3.5 trips a day, and essentially moves 5.5 people around a day. If you take that and you use an Uber or something similar, right, you get to moving around 38.4 people a day. But as soon as you flip that into Uber Pool and you're doing the same number of trips, but you're moving far more people per trip, you get to a tremendous amount of efficiency, which is 72 people that you move around a day. That's a 13-fold increase in efficiency, and imagine what impact that would have on the number of vehicles driving from sort of New Belgrade to Old Belgrade in the morning and in the evening. It would be tremendous. The second product that we are also very excited about is, imagine you take our transportation platform that we've developed now in many markets where we operate, and you think, well, yes, it'd be great if I can get a car in 5 minutes, but what if I can get anything I wanted in 5 minutes, right? So we took this and we worked fairly hard at overlaying the delivery piece onto our Uber transportation infrastructure. And really the product here that we've launched is Uber Rush. We launched Uber Rush a year ago in the US to start, and we realized that the engineering behind it was quite a lot more complicated than just moving people, because it's rather than one-to-one, it's many-to-many. So we kept the product on the road, but on the back end, we did a huge amount of work, a huge amount of engineering to make sure that we could actually take our existing transportation infrastructure and do a many-to-many delivery piece here. And we've just launched it recently in the US, and it's been tremendously successful. Basically what this means is that if I'm my own business owner, I'm selling whatever it is that I want to sell or make on my online web store. I don't have to go to Amazon. I can simply link right into the Uber Rush system and deliver it far cheaper than ever before to my clients, to any client that orders directly from my application. So really making delivery far more convenient, affordable, and usable. That's it from our side.
Just stay here for the second, please. Stay here for the second because we have a question, I suppose. Da li imamo neka pitanja iz publike? Pretpostavljam da da. Izvolite. Samo mikrofon.
Hello to everyone. First of all, I'm quite familiar with Uber products, and I'm interested, first of all, when do you plan to come to Serbia? And if yes, what is your approach to our law? Is it difficult to find the right solution? And third question is, because I had never have a chance to use Uber, I'm interested in who creates the price for a ride. Is it Uber or is it a driver, or how it works? Thank you.
Okay. So the first question is that, unfortunately we have no immediate plans of coming to Serbia. Well, I pulled up that map of eyeballs yesterday, so maybe that changes after I've looked at that, given the amount of demand that sits in the market here. Secondly, on how do we slot in with the existing regulatory framework, given that we don't have an immediate plan. Obviously, we haven't spent too much time thinking about it. But I think if anything, what we've learned as we've launched in markets and comparing, especially in Europe, successful markets to or more challenging markets, it's that the closer we can launch to the existing regulatory framework, the better for us. Even though that may not be the most optimal sort of product for both riders and drivers, at least it's a start, right? It's about getting into the market and then developing with the market and using the good product that you're offering in the market to then continuously improve it. So that would definitely be our strategy here. The third question was around the price. So no. So the price is set by Uber, and basically what we do is It depends on whether we've been in the city before or whether, and we have some data. If we don't have data for a city, we'll try and understand what another similar city looks like, try and understand sort of what's the best mechanism to compensate both riders, but create the best price product compensate drivers and create the best price product for riders. But then we also have a dynamic pricing mechanism that increases or decreases the prices based on the supply-demand dynamics.
Još pitanja? Imamo sa Twittera, from Twitter.
We've heard a lot about the occasional roadblocks for Uber around the world, protests from the designated taxi drivers. And do you think that eventually, in a year or two, the taxi drivers that are designated already will eventually come to peace with Uber and find their own opportunity and understand that Uber is working for their benefit, should they eventually find out the fact that they can enhance their business with Uber and not to protest against it?
I mean, absolutely right. I think this is always a market-by-market scenario. I think the end scenario, or the end game that you're talking about is exactly the right one. It may be Uber, it may be a competitor, it may be a local app that they're working with, right? But the technology itself is just fundamentally more efficient, so that has to happen. In markets where it's happened with Uber is an interesting one. So I'm South African. I launched our business first in South Africa 2 years ago. And when we launched there, especially with a low-cost product, we worked with taxi operators in that market. And now vast majority of the taxi industry is actually, no longer works as formal taxis, but actually far more efficiently, effectively on Uber, on our system, and making more money than they did before.